Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, let me start out by saying thank you to the staff here at the museum. You folks did a great job of making me feel at home and setting everything up. And also, I want to thank my publisher, State House Press and Texas A&M, for publishing my book. And I want to have special thanks, though, to Sam Houston, because if it wasn't for Sam Houston, we probably wouldn't be in Texas right now. We'd be somewhere else. So special thanks to Sam Houston. This book started out as a pandemic project for me. Is this loud enough? Can you all hear me back there? Okay, you can, good. It started out as a pandemic project. I needed to get out of the house like everybody else, but I didn't want to mingle with people. And I'd already been to San Jacinto, I'd been to San Antonio, I'd been to Goliad. I said, I've never been to Gonzales. I'm going to go out to Gonzales and see what's there and look at the sites and see where things started. And it was fun. It was a day trip. It was a nice trip. Just did it by myself. And I said, well, I know Houston had to leave here suddenly, but I wonder where he camped the next night. And I started looking for I assumed there would be some document, some book that would document all of the sites, all of the campsites across the state of Texas. And I couldn't really find a good one, not one that had actually visited the sites. So I started out to find, document, and visit every campsite on Houston's trip. And that's really what the book is about. So let's see, did that not work? There we go. All right. I realize I need to point at the box up there. This is the best sentence in the whole book. It's the first sentence in the introduction, and it really sums up my attitude. The Texas countryside is an open-air museum. The places around Texas can connect you to the past just as a museum can, except the difference is in the countryside, it's not curated for you. The story is not put together for you. You have to go out and find the story on your own. You have to go out and do your own research and put it together for you. And I think that's a wonderful thing because it creates that sense of curiosity. It reinforces that natural curiosity that people have. Sometimes history is taught improperly, I think. They give you the big book and tell you to memorize some dates and names and things like that. And there's a story in the book, but you don't always have any interest in the story. Whereas if you go to a site and find out what happened right there and spend time and research it, you can connect to the whole big picture, and it's much more fun. It's sort of like the difference, I say, between going fishing and going shopping. If you go shopping, you're going to come home maybe with a fish, but it's not very exciting. But if you go fishing and you catch a fish and you bring it home and cook it, that's exciting, and you remember that. So I'm more interested in that. But, whoops, did we lose it? Hold on. There we go. A source of motivation for a lot of my work has come from this book. And some of you may remember this from the 1990s. There was this British historian, Michael Wood, who had a wonderful series called Follow in the Footsteps of Alexander the Great. And he went all over Asia trying to go to the exact places where Alexander the Great went. And that was just a fabulous series. Does anybody remember that? We got a few. Okay. And the book is great too. I bought the book after I saw the series. And that's motivated a lot of work that I did. One of the first things I did in history, it was maybe 25 years ago, I did an analysis of a murder in a small Canadian town back in 1871. And I got all the original court documents and read all the testimony and learned that the murder happened when poor Cyrus was sitting on the fence between this farmer's property and that farmer's property. And I got the records, the property records from 1871, so I could identify exactly where he was sitting when he shot his boss. And then I found where they hanged him shortly afterwards, after a trial. So that was very popular in Canada. It was a lot of fun. Poor Cyrus, by the way, the guy, the reason I was interested, of course, that was one of my ancestors who was convicted of a murder. But it was that same type of history, that bottoms-up history, where you start with a locality. You start at a given spot and then work up into the bigger picture. But I really, really enjoyed Michael Wood. He also motivated, I used to do a newspaper, or a magazine article, a monthly column on history that I called Footprints. And the idea of that was I would pick some historical event in Houston and go to the site where it happened to see if there were any footprints left over. Typically, there was nothing. It had me out crawling around under bridges and freeways and things like that. But it was kind of fun, and it was interesting, and it again got people out of the house and looking at individual places. So there's a lot of value in connecting with these places. By the way, I wanted to title my book in the footsteps of Sam Houston, but my editor had a better idea. So that's how it got its current title. I said yes. So anyway, now this sort of summarizes, I think, all of the value of looking at exact locations. It creates that personal connection. It's a starting point for understanding the big picture. And these sites are sometimes underutilized cultural assets that people don't know about. And you get out and discover and explore and learn from these sites. So anyway, that's the summary. Now, whoops, I went too fast. There are 26 chapters in the book, one chapter for each site, and there are 31 separate locations in the book. And as you can see, starting out here in Gonzales and then going across the state of Texas, it was not in a straight line. It was fairly random, actually. And some of these sites are marked and some of them are not. About half of them have historical markers. And so I focused on identifying all of them and visiting every one. Even if it did have a historical marker, there's still a story there. And every site has an individual story. So now you don't have to do the book in the order in which Sam Houston took the trip. It's nice if you've got the leisure time to do that, but I didn't actually even write it in that order. Each one is a separate individual chapter that has a story associated with it. So you can go in any number, in any order that you want. Now here's something that's a little unique about the way that we put the book together. I know you don't like QR codes. I don't like when you go to a restaurant and they want you to use the QR code instead of giving you a menu. I say, give me a real menu. Come on. I want to see the pictures of the food, you know. But we put QR codes instead of maps in the book. And when you put your phone over the QR code, it takes you into Google Maps. Google Maps knows where you are and gives you directions from where you are then to that site. And then when you go to the site, presumably the way you would use the book, you would pick a chapter, read the chapter, use the QR code, you go to the site, and then there's a link on that page that goes to my publisher's website where I've done a podcast for every chapter. So as you're walking around at the site, nobody's going to walk around and read a book. but you do want to walk around and maybe listen to the chapter again as you're there. So it is curated in a sense like a museum is with the headphones that they give you. And there are 26 podcasts, one for each site. And finally, what the publisher is doing with this, they're promoting it as a self-guided history tour for Texas history courses, either in college or high school. And you got to imagine how hard it probably is these days to do a field trip. If you do a field trip in high school, you've got to get everybody together. There's probably no end of liability issues, and it's a hassle. Whereas this way, the teacher can say, buy the book, do some of the self-guided field trip yourself, and then when you're at the site, you sign in. There's a way to check in through Google Maps to record that you're there so the instructor can see who was there. So it's a totally integrated system that uses Google Maps, and that's all part of the book. And that was my publisher's idea, Don and Susan Fraser, and I credit them with that idea. I wasn't crazy about it at first, but as I got into it, I loved it. Okay. So now, why examine Houston's trip? What's special about Sam Houston's journey that we should study? Well, the trip was 41 or 42 days long, and the battle was only 18 minutes, maybe a little longer, depending upon which historian you listen to. But there's been a lot of interest, a lot of study in the actual battle. But the trip was where Sam Houston overcame all of his problems. It's where he implemented his strategy. He couldn't even get to the battle unless he had a lot of successes along the way in the trip. So it's important to not ignore all of the things that Sam Houston went through. And I think studying the trip itself gives you a good insight into Sam Houston's character, his strategy, and his successes. So, now, what were some of Houston's problems? And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. First of all, he didn't have enough men. When he started out at Gonzales, he had 300 men. He was expecting more. He was expecting another 600 or so, both from Goliad and from the Alamo. And as we know, all 600 of those men got captured and killed. So he had a lot less men than he thought he was going to have at the beginning. And the men he had no experience and very little training. Some of them were poorly armed with shotguns and things like that. It was not a true military operation, certainly nothing compared to the Mexican army that was chasing him. He had a bad relationship with his president. The president of the Republic of Texas, President Burnett, was a very straight-laced gentleman. He deplored cussing and he deplored drinking. And these were two things that Sam Houston was quite good at. So they were, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but they didn't agree personally on things. And the president at one point ordered Sam Houston, do not retreat. Do not retreat anymore. You're going to stand and fight. And he sent in Thomas Rusk to take over if Houston continued to retreat. Thomas Rusk was the Secretary of War and Houston's superior officer. So that bad relationship had to be dealt with, and that was one of the problems that Houston had. In addition, there were all these civilians tagging along with the army. This was a runaway scrape. These were people who were evacuating ahead of the Mexican army, and they wanted to stay with Sam Houston's army for protection, but they were upset with Sam Houston also because Sam Houston was burning homes as he went along, and he was burning their homes, but they were with him for protection. So that relationship was not good, as you can imagine. So in addition to all of those, the weather, springtime in Texas, mud. It was bluebonnet time, but I didn't see any mention of the bluebonnets in any of the primary source material that I read. I did see mention of people being forced to train in knee-deep mud, but nobody wrote about the bluebonnets. So the weather was definitely against him. And he had to overcome all of these things just to get to the battle. So you can see it was a problem. Now, what was his strategy? First of all, retreat. And retreat suddenly. He started out with his retreat from Gonzales. As soon as he knew that the Alamo fell, he ordered an instantaneous retreat. Get him out of here right now. And once he made a decision, it was retreat right now. The other thing was to live off the land. Travel light. Don't carry a lot of baggage. Don't carry a lot of weapons. Don't carry a lot of food. And all along the way, wherever Houston went, fence posts vanished and cattle vanished. They would cut down the local fences to start a fire, and they would slaughter the local cattle for dinner. And that was his standard operating procedure. Sometimes they had some corn to eat, but it was a lot of beef roasted over an open fire on a stick. And it was beef that they could find locally. So all of that, there was one case where one of the people eventually sued Sam Houston to get the money back for his cattle that were stolen or that were used for the Army. And it was as late as, I think, 1854, when Texas was already part of the United States, that suit was settled, and they paid him for the cattle that Sam Houston took. So, but live off the land and avoid small battles. This was one of the things that really frustrated Houston's soldiers. There were various times where they could have won a small engagement, but Houston knew that with this untrained army and limited supplies, they were good for one big battle, and that's all. And he worked them hard at training and got them ready for one big battle, and he didn't want to win a small battle because he knew that he could do it, but it would not win the war. He was waiting for Santa Anna to make a mistake so he could win the war. Plus, he had multiple small cannons rather than one big one. Unlike Santa Anna had the one big cannon, the Golden Standard. And as we know, Houston had the two cannons, the two smaller twin sisters. And that gave him more maneuverability. And that was part of his, it was luck that the two cannons showed up like that. But that fit in well with his strategy of using maneuverability to his military advantage. And finally, he never, ever explained this strategy to his soldiers. And there was a specific reason for that. He knew that eventually some of them would potentially be captured by the enemy and they'd spill the beans. And he didn't want that to happen. And as it turned out, one of them or several of them were captured, and when they were captured, they spilled the beans. And what they told Santa Anna was that Houston is a coward and he's leaving. He's leaving the country to go across the border into Louisiana where he'll be safe, and Houston is not going to stand and fight. And that was that message got to Santa Anna, and that was one of the things that made him overconfident and eventually led to his big mistake of trying to be a big hero. So that really worked to Houston's advantage. And all along the way, he was, of course, trying to get the Mexicans to extend their supply lines, and he left nothing behind him wherever he went. Burned every home, destroyed every boat that he could get his hands on. And now, where did this strategy come from? This is interesting. We all know Houston, as a youth, lived with the Indians. I think some of his strategy of stealth came from the Indians, but I think also some of it was Napoleon's strategy. The book, I won't go into this in great detail here, but there's a chapter in there where we have the 8 great military innovations of Napoleon, and it's pretty much all of what Sam Houston was doing. Live off the land, travel light, use mobility to your advantage, wait for one large battle, don't worry about the small battles. That was Napoleon's strategy. And so I think it's kind of, this is a sidelight, but it's kind of interesting that Santa Anna called himself the Napoleon of the West because he was very proud. But I think he was actually defeated by Houston's implementation of Napoleon's strategy. So, but that's a sidelight instead of visiting the sites. Now, what I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation, I said that every site has a story. So I'm going to go through about 5 sites and talk about each one a little bit. The first one, I'm going to go into more detail and talk about what I did to find the site, talk about how I did the research in a little more detail than the other sites. The other sites, I'll just tell you what I found, and you can read the book and see what research I did. By the way, everything was well documented in the book, and if you go back in the bibliography, this is again, I credit my publisher with this innovation. They divided everything into primary sources and secondary sources. So you could see all of the source material that I read to get the information. And that's what I tried to do, was to go back to the primary source material, read things that were written by his soldiers. And a lot of his soldiers wrote books or commentaries on their time with Houston, and there are excellent sources in there. And they'd not been read, though, as far as I could tell, with an eye to tracking the location. I read them all with the eye to getting a hint on where they camped on a certain night. So I was looking for things that maybe others weren't looking for. But anyway, the first one of these is Beeson's Crossing, which is currently Columbus, Texas. And as you can see up here, Houston was camped on this side, on the east side of the river, and there was a division of the Mexican army camped over here. Santa Anna had divided the army into 4 or 5 units, and this was a standoff. But Houston had a commanding position. The enemy couldn't attack him across the river because they would all get shot going over the river. And this was the location of Beeson's Crossing. And Beeson's Crossing was the major east-west crossing for Texas at that time to get across the Colorado River. And they had everything that you wanted for the traveler. Everything was available. You could get your horses shoed, you could get some food. It was, I think, the first idea of Buc-ee's in Texas. It was everything for the traveler. I'm not sure, but I expect Buc-ee's has better restrooms than they had at Beeson's Crossing. But anyway, Houston was camped at Beeson's Crossing for a week, and his army swelled while he was there. It swelled to about 1,400 people. People knew where he was, they found him, they volunteered, and he trained there for a week. And then, all of a sudden, after telling his men that we're going to stay here and we're going to fight it out here, all of a sudden, one morning he got up and ordered a retreat instantaneously. And let me just read you. So the question I was trying to answer is, where did he go? Where was the next site? And it's not really well documented, but I made a list of clues. And these were the clues that I was able to get from the primary sources. I'm going to read just a short paragraph from a fellow named Dr. N.D. Labadie, who was the French-Canadian physician who was with the Texan Army. And he wrote about this in, I think, around 1854. And this is the kind of primary source material that I love to use. He says, we at once perceived that Houston had commenced his retreat. Before learning that morning, it was hidden to me that a retreat would be contemplated, notwithstanding the preparations apparently for a permanent encampment. I then, for the first time, addressed General Houston on the subject, who knew me as well as I did him. He declared to me that the grass all being eaten up and the horses starving, it was important to get on to new and better range, and that as there was a fine spring with plenty of grass 6 miles distant, he would only go to that site and encamp. So there's the hint. He camped by a spring the next night, and it was 6 miles, okay? By the way, what Houston told him was not true. He was, of course, trying to keep everybody in the dark. The real reason that Houston left instantly was that he decided that his position was actually vulnerable, because with multiple Mexican armies in the field, they could just cross the river at a different site, as he had done, and come around from behind and have him. So, and that was also when he learned that the 400 soldiers from Goliad were all captured. So he had information that he didn't want, that he acted on, but he certainly didn't tell Dr. Labadie that. But that's where the hint about traveling 6 miles came from, and that's where the hint that they camped by a spring. So I tried to tie every hint that I came up with some primary source material. Now, what did I do with that? Well, the first thing I did, I started researching that area, and this is an 1841 map of Colorado County, and it shows, I know you're not going to be able to see this in great detail here, but it shows here on the left side, that line is a road. It says, it's written on there, it says the road to San Jacinto. Now, where did I find an 1841 map? Well, one of the things of doing your own research, it's so easy these days with the internet. There's a wonderful website called the Portal to Texas History. It's supported by the University of North Texas, and you can go in there and sort and filter and search for anything. Now, it doesn't have all these documents, but it has links to the documents. And that was one of the better research items that I used. So anyway, I came up with this map, and I said, well, the important thing, he probably took that road at that angle. So I got out an old-fashioned protractor, and I measured the angle of that road, and it was about 60 degrees. And then I went to Google Maps, and I drew a 6-mile line at 60 degrees using the same old-fashioned protractor. And I said, okay, let's see what's out there at the end. Let's see. Oops, hold on, let me back up. I hit two at once. When you go to the satellite view of Google Maps at that 6-mile spot, you see, first of all, yes, there's water there. And that dense green area looks for all the world like it's a spring. Looks like a wet spot with water continually seeping out of the ground. So that confirmed for me that there is a spring 6 miles down that road. And I'm thinking, that's a good indication that that really is where Sam Houston camped that night. And then I went to the U.S. Geological Survey and got a geological map of the same area. And it does confirm a spring in there and confirms the water as well. So finally, when I thought I probably have that site correctly marked, and I went there. And there it is. It's on Mentz Road near Mentz, Texas, M-E-N-T-Z. And it's a perfectly normal Texas countryside. There's no historical marker there. There's no indication that probably 1,400 angry men spent a night there, just one night. But I bet the people that own that property would like to know that. And I bet the kids that go to men's high school would like to know that, would like to know what's in their neighborhood. So that was the kind of research that I did to identify these sites. And that was fun. That was one that worked out. Let me do another one. Let me go on. I've only got 5 sites, and that was the first one. The others will not take that long. Where did Houston camp on April 17th? Now, this is a mystery, too. There's no marker for this, and there's some various discussion on where he camped. But by April 17th, things had changed. They'd gone through the fork in the road. Houston was on the way to battle. The men were happy. Everybody was full of joy and very eager to get going. Plus, they just had a big chicken dinner the night before and left chicken feathers all over the field. So the men at this point had come around to Houston's side. Unfortunately, they had to lug the twin sisters themselves because they had a team of oxen carrying them. And there's a famous tale where Pamela Mann, who owned the oxen, came back, confronted Houston, and took her oxen back. And she was apparently a very profane and well-armed lady. And even Sam Houston was no match for a profane and well-armed young lady. And he lost his oxen, and the men had to pull him, or the horses. So anyway, these are the clues that I had for where this campsite might be. That he was trying to get to Harrisburg as soon as he could, because that's where Santa Anna was going after the Texas government that was there. And the Army traveled 15 miles that day, according to one of the primary sources I read. And the campsite was about 6 miles from Harrisburg, okay? And they arrived at the next camp about noon the next day. And they camped at the edge of a forest, and they camped at the head of a bayou. Okay, so those are the clues that I was able to come up with out of the primary sources. But the first thing I did when I looked at Google Maps, the 15 miles and the 6 miles would have added to 21 miles. But in fact, the shortest distance would have been about 29 miles. So right away, I know that I had some bad clues. So I threw out all the clues that related to distance. Somebody just made a mistake. That happens. And I knew those were bad clues. But the question still is, where did he camp? And that made the other clues more important. The head of the bayou was the most important clue, because there's only one bayou that has a head in that area, and that's Hunting Bayou. So I went to Hunting Bayou, and this is the head of Hunting Bayou. This is a big wet spot in the Cashmere Gardens area of Houston, if you know where Cashmere Gardens is. And a lot of people tried to claim that Houston camped in Woodland Oaks, and I've heard stories of realtors saying, you know, Houston probably camped in your backyard, and that makes this house more valuable. And in actuality, I think he camped in Cashmere Gardens, and I think he camped next to this barbecue joint, which is in Cashmere Gardens. And no, this picture is not in the book, because if you do somebody's business, you have to identify them and get permissions and all that. So this is one that I took but did not include in the book. But rather than camping in in the fancier area of the Woodland Heights, I think he camped in Cashmere Gardens. And this is the beginnings of Hunting Bayou. It's about a mile down the road. You can see it's been channelized a bit. It's been worked on for flood control, but it's not been filled in with cement yet. And it's a small bayou at that point. And I think that's the best candidate for where he camped, right in that area. And if you look at it on the map, I drew a line that follows Hunting Bayou just south, just staying on this side of Hunting Bayou all the way down to the campsite in Galena Park, where we know he camped before, and that's where he crossed Buffalo Bayou. By the way, he did not ever go to Harrisburg because from the campsite in Galena Park, he could see that Santa Ana was there first and had already destroyed the town. He could see the smoke coming from the town. So he was never actually there. And all right, let me get on to another site. This one is, let me just read this chapter to you. This is an interesting way that I confirmed the location of one at Raccoon Bend. And there were some other clues, but one of the clues came from this account by William Zuber. He says, 30 men were assigned to cut a road 1.5 miles long going east through the dense bottom to a lake. We worked to the lake in about 4 hours. I mean, 4 hours is a lot of work to go 1.5 miles. Clearing the proposed camping ground was a laborious job, and we had to cut away or burn a great many wild grapevines. Well, I used that as one of the clues to find this site because there were other clues. I'm not going to go into all of them. They're in the book. But when I got there, wild vines, a big tangle of vines. So I'm sure these are probably the descendants of the vines that Sam Houston's men cut through. And I said, that helps confirm that I may have found the right site here. And that was one of the interesting confirmations that I had of my research. Now, this site, this is the fourth one, and it's very, very controversial. Yes, this is a historical marker with a water gauge on the top, a rain gauge. And yes, it's homemade. All right, so what's going on here? Well, this is the site for Burnham's Crossing. Burnham's Crossing is another crossing on the Colorado River. And there was a great deal of controversy over where this site, where the marker should really go. The Texas Historical Commission installed the marker in 1936 as part of the program. There was a centennial program, and they put the marker where they thought it should be. And it stayed there from 1936 until 1964, when some people from the neighboring county were so convinced that the Texas Historical Commission had made a mistake. They were so convinced that they stole the marker. This is Texas. You don't ask permission, right? They didn't think to just contact the government and say this is an error. They had a dispute over where Burnham's Ferry should be, okay? So they stole the marker and put it at this site. But more importantly, they were so sure they were right, they didn't like the inscription on the marker, so they ground it off and put their own inscription in it. It looks very professional. And it stayed at this site, and then they put their initials in the bottom on the other side because they wanted to confirm what they'd done. So the stolen marker stayed at this site from 1964 until 2010. And in 2010, somebody noticed that it wasn't in the right spot. Somebody looking at maps said, well, there's supposed to be a marker over here, and it's not there. And they found it at this site. So then they took it back. The Texas Historical Commission got involved because it is their marker. and they put it back in the original site, except here it is in the original site. Now you can't see it really well, but this is the marker. You can see the indentation where the text is. That's where it's been ground out, okay? The Texas Historical Commission decided, apparently, to leave the bad text in there and to just put the correct text on the other side. So this is the only marker, I bet, in Texas that has two inscriptions that say different things, one on each side of the marker. So it's been, and now it's back in its original spot near Holman, Texas, and it's been there since 2010. Now, all of this, it's documented in the book, but this is all playing out in the local newspapers, which luckily have been digitized, and you can go back in and read the articles about this and see people arguing about the location. I decided, well, okay, that's interesting, but all you do is go to Google Maps, and there's a road on the other side of the river called Burnham's Ferry Road. So I said, I'll just go over there and go down Burnham's Ferry Road and see where it ends in the Colorado River and see if that's which site it's closest to. And that was a beautiful trip. That was, you've seen that slide before, but that was a beautiful trip down that tiny little dirt road that I do know Sam Houston took. But you come to private property. And so I couldn't quite get to the river. By the way, everything that I did in the book, all of the exploration was done with an eye to having somebody do it without going on private property, or without asking any special permission. There were a couple of places where I could have gone to a business and said, look, I'm writing a book, can you let me in here, or this or that. I didn't do any of that actually on purpose because I wanted everything that I did here to be repeatable by people who might use the book. So I stopped there at the end of Burnham's Ferry Road, and my idea to solve it by going on that side didn't really work. But with a little more research, it may be that both sides are right, because it appears that there may have been two Burnham's Ferry ferries. There was one before the war that Sam Houston destroyed as he went through it, and then there was a new one that they built after the war, possibly in a different location. So it could be that both markers are right. I don't know. There's a little mystery there. But that one was fun. Now, here's one, and this is the last one. I'm going to close with this, actually. This is just a few miles from here. This one does have a marker. It has a very good marker. And this is the bridge over Vince's Bayou. And I think we all know the story. Vince's Bayou goes north and south, and you have to cross it really to get to this point, to where we are now. Santa Anna's army crossed it, Houston's army crossed it, and we know that Houston ordered it destroyed, burned, or cut down, and there's some discussion of which one, on the day of the battle. And that was in part to prevent any reinforcements from coming that way. So I went to this site and did a little research, and one of the things that came out was that Santa Anna had a problem getting his mule across the bridge. The mule would not go. The mule that was pulling the big cannon. And I guess when mules don't want to do something, they're not going to do it. So in that day, the mule gave directions to the general. And the general told General Castrillion to take a few men, take the mule downstream as far as he needed to go, and see where you can ford the river and then meet up with us. And I don't know if anybody else has tried to find this exact spot where the mule forded the river, but I went down. Now, unfortunately, it's all been channelized, but I went down through the neighborhood there and found an area where the stream started to be small enough that you could probably ford there. And that's possibly the area where the mule pulling of a Golden Standard cannon crossed. But back to the original site now, back to the bridge over Vince's Bayou, where the marker is, just down here by Ritchie Road, actually. I went there, the first time I went there was on a very, very low tide on a day when it was very, very dry. And one of the things that I saw in the water, you look at the top, does that look like it might be the foundation for a bridge? It's clearly wood. And as I read about it, we know that Sam Houston ordered Death Smith to destroy the bridge. They tried to set fire to it, but it was too wet, and it was cypress wood anyway, and it wouldn't burn. So they chopped it down and let it fall in the water. And I don't know, but that may be some of the original wood from the bridge over Vince's Bayou. That would be, it was underwater most of the time, rarely out of the water. And I've gone back there 4 times since, and I've taken friends. I'm in the Houston Archaeological Society. I have fun doing that. And I took some friends there saying, take a look at this for me. And of course, on every day that I went, the water was too high. We never saw it again. So it's a good thing that I got these pictures on the first day that I was there. But it's a bit of a mystery. And so I think I'll close with a bit of a mystery, because that's what's fun about history, is looking into the mysterious stuff, trying to find things, trying to understand things, and trying to explore it for yourself. And so anyway, I thank you.
Yeah.